Have you even read the Constitution? That was the question. 5 words, directed at the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, in a federal hearing room under oath. And the man who runs America's premier law enforcement agency did not have a clean answer. That moment did not arrive without preparation. Senator Jeff Merkley did not walk into that hearing room with a sharp question and hope for the best. He walked in with a document, a legal argument, and a sequence that had been constructed with the precision of someone who understood exactly where the conversation was going to end before it began. The room did not know that yet. Nobody did. The hearing had started exactly the way these hearings always start. Budget lines, staffing figures, resource allocation. Patel arrived composed, controlled, and entirely comfortable with the rhythm of a proceeding designed to produce nothing consequential. He had navigated these rooms before. He knew the language. He understood the exits. He had been asked hard questions before. He had deflected harder ones. He had survived hostile interviews, media storms, and confirmation battles that would have ended careers less carefully managed than his. Every one of those experiences had reinforced the same lesson. Stay calm, give nothing, let the clock run. He checked his notes once, he adjusted his posture, he was ready. Then Merkley leaned into the microphone. Subscribe right now if you want every constitutional confrontation, every hearing breakdown, and every unanswered question covered before the networks touch it. Hit the bell, never miss a moment. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand who Jeff Merkley is. He is not a politician who stumbled into a constitutional argument. He is a senator who has spent years in the chamber watching institutional language used as a shield against accountability. He knows what deflection sounds like. He knows what evasion looks like when it is dressed in procedural clothing. And he knows that the most effective way to expose evasion is not to argue against it, but to build a sequence so simple, so grounded in plain language that the evasion becomes the story itself. That morning, he had one document, not a classified file, not a leaked memo, not a bank record obtained through a 14-month FOIA battle, the Constitution of the United States. He did not start with deportations. He did not start with El Salvador. He started with the one thing that is supposed to protect every single person standing on American soil, the Fifth Amendment. Merkley calls it the Freedom Clause. Not by accident. The Fifth Amendment was written 4 years into this nation's existence because the founders understood something fundamental about power, that governments left unchecked will reach further than they are supposed to, that without a written guarantee, life, liberty, and property become negotiable, that due process is not a courtesy extended by the powerful to the powerless. It is a right that applies to all persons, not all citizens, not all documented individuals. All persons. 2 words written in plain English, affirmed by the Supreme Court across generations of cases. Not a theory, not a legal argument requiring interpretation. The law, written down, available to anyone who picks up the document and reads it. Patel confirmed he was familiar with the Fifth Amendment. He confirmed it applies to all persons in the United States. He said it clearly, without hesitation. Under oath. That answer was the foundation, and Merkley was about to build something on top of it. Drop a comment right now. Do you believe the director of the FBI should know whether hundreds of people were removed from American soil without due process? Drop your answer below. The question Merkley asked next was not complicated. It was not a legal trap requiring years of constitutional scholarship to understand. It was the kind of question that has a direct answer or it doesn't. Have you launched an investigation into the violation of the Freedom Clause? Several hundred individuals had been swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador. No hearing, no trial, no due process, no day in court. They had been removed from American soil, their liberty taken away, before any legal process determined whether that removal was lawful. The Fifth Amendment, the document Patel had just confirmed he agreed with, the document that applies to all persons, had either been followed or it had not. There was no middle ground available. Either due process was provided or it was not. Either the law was followed or it was not. Either the FBI director was prepared to say so or he was not. Patel's response was immediate. I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process. The room shifted, not loudly, but unmistakably. because that answer did not fit the oath. It did not fit the confirmation. It did not fit the man sitting in the director's chair of the nation's premier law enforcement agency saying seconds earlier that yes, he agreed with the Fifth Amendment, yes, he understood it applied to all persons. The confirmation and the refusal now sat in the same record, 30 seconds apart, both under oath, both on camera, and everyone in that chamber could see exactly what had just happened. If accountability under oath matters to you, support this channel right now. Like this video, share it. Because what happened next was the moment the entire exchange broke open. Merkley did not let the answer expand. He did not allow it to become a policy discussion. He did not permit Patel to drift into procedural language about interagency coordination or jurisdictional boundaries. He brought it back to the sequence. It is your job to investigate crimes. Have you launched an investigation? Patel's defense rested on a phrase that would define the rest of the exchange. It's not for me to call the balls and strikes. 5 words that did more damage than any accusation Merkley could have made. Because the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was not being asked to prosecute. He was not being asked to convict. He was not being asked to render a legal judgment on the constitutionality of federal immigration policy. He was being asked whether his agency had opened an investigation into a potential violation of the highest law in the land, and he said it wasn't his call. Think about what that means. The FBI investigates federal crimes. Constitutional violations are federal matters. The Fifth Amendment is federal law, and the director of the agency responsible for investigating federal crimes just told a Senate committee that deciding whether to investigate a potential violation of federal constitutional law is not his call to make. Merkley pressed harder. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He referenced Miranda versus Arizona. He referenced Reno versus Flores. He cited decades of Supreme Court precedent affirming clearly, repeatedly, without ambiguity, that due process protections extend to all individuals regardless of citizenship status. He was not presenting a theory. He was reading the plain language of the document Patel had taken an oath to uphold. He was citing the specific cases in which the highest court in the country had already answered the question Patel claimed he could not answer. The constitutional question had already been resolved by the Supreme Court multiple times over multiple decades in cases available to any person with access to a law library or a search engine. Patel's response, "I am not a constitutional scholar." The chamber did not make a sound, not because no one had anything to say, but because everyone in that room understood what had just happened. The director of the FBI, the nation's top law enforcement official, had just told a United States senator that he could not answer a question about the Constitution because he was not a constitutional scholar. Not a constitutional scholar, the man who oversees 35,000 employees, a $10 billion annual budget, field offices in every major American city, the nation's most powerful domestic law enforcement apparatus, the agency whose founding mandate includes the investigation of federal crimes, which constitutional violations are. That man had just told the Senate that reading the plain language of the Constitution was beyond his expertise. Merkley's response came without hesitation. You don't need to be a scholar, you just have to read it. That line did not require elaboration. It did not need context or framing or legal citation. It was the simplest possible response to the most revealing possible evasion. The Constitution is not a classified document. It is not a technical manual requiring specialized training to interpret. It is a public record written in plain language that has been publicly available for over 2 centuries, and the plain language says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. No person. Not no citizen, not no documented resident, no person. Merkley held up the document. He read the language directly. He did not paraphrase. He did not summarize. He read the words as they were written because the words as written do not require interpretation. They require only reading. If watching constitutional accountability matter to you, like this video right now. Every like keeps this investigation visible. Patel pushed back. He drew a distinction between removal proceedings and criminal acts. He argued that deportations fall under a different branch of government. He suggested that immigration enforcement is the domain of other agencies, not the FBI. He positioned himself as an investigator of criminal acts, not a constitutional arbiter of administrative proceedings. It was a defense designed to sound procedurally reasonable, and in a different context with a different senator, it might have worked. Merkley did not let it work. He pointed out the obvious. When people are arrested on the street and detained and sent out of the country, their liberty has been taken away. The Fifth Amendment uses the word liberty specifically. It does not limit its protection to criminal proceedings. It applies to any government action that removes a person's liberty. Arrest is the removal of liberty. Detention is the removal of liberty. Deportation without due process is the removal of liberty. These are not legal opinions, they are definitions. Patel's response remained the same. That is a constitutional question. It is not for me to answer. I will wait for the Supreme Court. Merkley's answer was immediate. The Supreme Court has already weighed in, repeatedly, clearly. The cases are on the record. The precedent is established. And you took an oath to the Constitution, not to a future Supreme Court ruling that tells you what you already should have known before you sat down in that chair. What makes this exchange consequential is not the confrontation itself. Washington produces confrontations every day. Senators press witnesses. Witnesses deflect. The cycle repeats. What makes this consequential is what it reveals about institutional posture. When the director of the FBI says it is not for me to call the balls and strikes on constitutional questions, he is not being cautious. He is not protecting ongoing investigations or preserving prosecutorial integrity. He is making a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice to treat the constitutional rights of several hundred people as someone else's problem. A choice to define his role so narrowly that the most fundamental protections in American law fall outside its edges. The Fifth Amendment was not written for easy cases. It was not written to protect rights when protection is politically convenient. It was written precisely for moments like this one, when the government moves faster than the courts, when hundreds of people are removed from American soil before anyone in power decides to ask whether removal was lawful, when the institutions designed to protect the rule of law look the other way and call it procedural caution. Merkley's frustration in that chamber was not political theater. It was not partisan performance for a cable news clip. It was the visible result of watching a man whose job is to uphold the law tell a Senate committee that he will not decide whether the law was broken until someone else tells him to. That is not caution. That is abdication. There is a word for what happens when the people responsible for enforcing the law decide that certain violations are someone else's problem. It is not a partisan word. It is not a political word. It is a legal word, and its meaning does not change based on which administration is in power or which group of people is affected. The word is failure. The exchange ended with Patel holding his ground, no investigation announced, no commitment made, no acknowledgement that the Supreme Court precedent Merkley cited had answered the question already, no recognition that the oath of office he took when he assumed the directorship of the FBI included a commitment to the Constitution, the entire Constitution, not the parts that are easy to enforce. What remained was a sequence in the official record. A director confirming he agrees with the Fifth Amendment. A director confirming it applies to all persons. A director declining to say whether he would investigate its apparent violation. A director claiming that the question of whether to investigate a potential constitutional violation is not his call to make. A director telling the United States Senate that he is not a constitutional scholar. 4 statements, all under oath, all on camera, all in the permanent record. The man who oversees the nation's most powerful domestic law enforcement apparatus does not need to be a constitutional scholar to read 4 words. All persons, due process. Those 4 words have been the law of this land for over 2 centuries. They have been affirmed by the highest court in the country across generations of cases. They do not require interpretation. They require enforcement. And the director of the FBI told a Senate committee that enforcement was not his call to make. Senator Merkley closed with the words that will follow this exchange out of the hearing room and into the record. You took an oath to the Constitution. I'll remind you of that since you seem to need the reminder. The chamber did not respond to that either, not with applause, not with outrage, with silence, the kind of silence that settles when a room full of people realizes they have just watched something that cannot be walked back. The hearing continued after that. Other senators asked other questions. The clock moved, the microphones lit up and went dark again. But the room no longer belonged to the scheduled agenda. It belonged to the question that had just been entered into the permanent record without an answer. Have you even read the Constitution? 5 words that the director of the FBI could not answer cleanly. under oath, in front of the Senate, on camera. Those 5 words are now in the record, and records do not fade. Share this video with everyone you know who believes the Constitution applies to everyone. The next hearing will determine whether this exchange produces accountability or disappears into the same bureaucratic silence it exposed. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the moment this channel goes quiet is the moment these questions stop being asked.